My lecture today is Roses Through Time, and I, uh, I love roses. I am not a master gardener. I'm just a rose lover. I've grown them since 1985 when I bought my first house. And so when we were talking, Cheryl Rose and I were talking about the gardening series this year, I'm like, I think I'd like to do a lecture on the history of roses. And she's like, that would be awesome. So I did. All right, here are some interesting facts about roses. At least I thought they were. Roses are about 35 million years old. The word rosa comes from the Greek word rhodon, or red. They probably originated in northern Persia. They were considered sacred in ancient civilizations. And there are references to roses as far back as 2860 BC by the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia. This is something I thought was interesting. Roses do not have thorns, they have prickles. Roses are grown around the world, and the Netherlands are the leading exporter of roses today. My love of roses probably originated with my family. Um, Here's a picture of my great uncle Vernie, Granny Maggie, and my mother. And growing up, Uncle Vernie lived with Granny Maggie, and they lived not too far from us. And Granny Maggie and Uncle Vernie had beautiful gardens. And they always talked about the roses, especially the roses. And my mother had rose gardens too. And my Uncle Vernie and Granny Maggie were artists, just not for a living, but they liked to dabble in art. And I never thought I would become an artist, but I am an artist today. And I got into that a little later in life, about the age of 40. On the right is a porcelain lamp that I inherited from Granny Maggie. I don't know the age of it, but it's got roses on it. And when she passed, boy, I scarfed that up. So I really have them to thank for my interest in roses, my love of roses. Here's something I wanted to mention: my grandmother's rose garden. She loved Jackson Perkins roses. And when I bought my first house, she got me signed up so that I also would receive their catalogs. And I bought from them over the years. I know she had Mr. Lincoln and the Peace Rose. The other two, I'm not sure that she would have had, but she probably did, because these were sold by Jackson Perkins, and I have the dates of their origination there. And these were all award-winning roses. And on the right, excuse me, I found a photo of a Mr. Lincoln rose. And I've grown Mr. Lincolns for years. And it's a beautiful, hardy rose. It grows kind of large, and it's just very popular and very beautiful. Makes a great cut flower. So in today's lecture, I'm going to mention the influence that roses have had on civilizations and cultures throughout the world, how roses have influenced art, music, and poetry. I'm going to just touch on modern roses today and talk about some of the uses of roses. And the photo on the right is of Paul Néron. It's a hybrid perpetual from 1869. And this was grown in my own garden. This is my photo. And it's one of my favorite roses. It's very large. It's also sometimes called the cabbage rose. In ancient Egypt, roses were very important. They were included in offerings to please their gods, especially Isis. She loved roses. And this image kept coming up on the internet when I Googled ancient Egypt and roses. And this is Isis there. Two roses that were found in ancient tombs were Rosa Gallica and Rosa Richardii. And the rose was also the emblem of their god Horus. Rosa Gallica was a term I'd heard of. It's also known as the French rose, the apothecary rose, or the rose of Provence. And it's believed to be the oldest cultivated rose in the world, and it was one of the first species of rose to be cultivated in Central Europe. It was cultivated by the Greeks and the Romans and was commonly used in medieval gardens. And it's a beautiful rose, and here it is here. You can still buy it today. I've never grown it. This rose was a little more interesting to me because I had never heard of it, the Rosa Richardii. And I believe that's the correct pronunciation because I had to Google how to pronounce it. It's also known as the Holy Rose or Rosa Sancta. It was found decorating Egyptian mummies as far back as 500 to 200 BC. And I found something interesting because it said it was extinct. And I thought, well, how can a rose be extinct? And then when I researched it, it's not extinct. You can find it, you can buy it still today. And there were references in the late 1800s as to the origination of it, and also the early 1900s as to the origination of it. And I'm like, well, how can it have originated then if they found it in the tombs of ancient Egypt? So I really don't know all those answers, but I thought it was interesting. It's probably a cross between Rosa Gallica and Rosa Phoenicia. And they found it in Christian churches in Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia today, in the 4th century AD. And it's a beautiful, beautiful rose. So also in Egypt, it was a symbol of love. Men would present their wives with roses at the beginning of festivals, and they had a lot of festivals back then. Cleopatra covered her floor with roses for when she was going to be with Mark Antony. And people grew them in their everyday gardens in ancient Egypt. In Rome, brides and grooms wore crowns of roses. Rose was a symbol of pleasure. Red Provence rose, or Rosa Gallica, was cultivated there. And here's something I thought was really interesting. Roses were painted on the banquet and their dining room ceilings. And there's a legal term today. I've heard of it. I didn't know what it meant, so I had to research it. But sub rosa is a legal term today. And what that means is if something is sub rosa, that means that it is to remain a secret. You're not to repeat it. And that's where this came from, was from ancient Rome. So people, when they were having their banquets or they had people over for dinner and they were in the dining room. So any conversations that they had, if there were roses painted on the ceilings, you just automatically knew that you were not to repeat any of the conversations. And cultivating and selling roses in ancient Rome was a profitable business. And here's an image I found of a painting from ancient Rome. Now, in the medieval period, which was roughly the 5th century to the 15th century, which is a long period of time, the Europeans struggled to maintain roses because of all the governments feuding and raiding, things like that. So people weren't really able to focus on growing roses. But a rebound did occur when Charles the Great grew roses on the grounds of his palace. So the people kind of took note and started growing roses again. Although monks continued growing roses for therapeutic uses in the monasteries, And interest increased in growing roses as world travel and trade increased. And here's a tapestry that came up um, that I thought was beautiful, and it was from that time period. It's called Courtiers in a Rose Garden, and you can see them, you can see the roses growing. It's very interesting. Now, the rosary, rosaries, I thought about that and I thought, oh, I wonder if that has anything to do with roses. And sure enough, it does. The rosary, the word is derived from the Latin word rosarium, which means a garland of roses. Prayers of Our Father and Hail Mary were recited using prayer beads during the medieval times. And in 1569, the Pope Pius V officially established the devotion of the Rosary in the Catholic Church. And my family growing up was Catholic. And I have two of my grandmother's rosaries, and here they are. So I thought that was interesting. In the 15th century, the symbol of the rose was used for the factions fighting for control of England. White was for the House of York, and red was for the House of Lancaster. And their conflict was known as War of the Roses, which lasted roughly from 1455 to 1487. And here's a painting of it, of the two factions fighting. In the 17th century, roses were in such high demand that royalty considered them as legal tender to barter and for payments. And this is something I thought was really interesting. Shoe roses became popular adornments of wealthy citizens, and they were made out of ribbon, often some sort of fabric. And here's a painting of a wealthy man, and you can see the roses on his shoes, and they're very large. And I thought that was interesting. Now, in the 19th century, that was considered the golden age of rose breeding in France. And Empress Josephine, who was married to Napoleon Bonaparte, had a vast rose garden at her home in Chateau de Malmaison outside of Paris, France. And here she is in a painting at her home, and you can see some roses there and some other flowers. She was a very, very ambitious woman, and her goal was to own one of every species of rose that there was in the world. And she spent a lot of money and had a lot of people go out there and bring her roses from all over the world. And here her rose garden is recreated by, I believe it's a gentleman, actually at La Rosary de Lay in France. And this is beautiful. I just paused when I saw this. I was like, oh, wow. What person wouldn't want to spend time there? It's just beautiful. In modern days, especially in the United States, President Reagan declared the rose as our national flower on October 7th, 1986. He signed the proclamation. And today there are at least over 150 species of the rose today, and that number varied when I was doing my research. Some said 100, some said 150. And it's widely recognized as a symbol of love, sympathy, or sorrow. And roses are often named after famous people. And if you know anything about roses, there are always new roses being bred. And there was a Ronald Reagan rose introduced in the year 2004. So at the top photo here, you see President Reagan signing the proclamation back in 1986. And then on the bottom is a rose that was introduced in 2004 that's named after him. I have not grown this rose, but it seems to be beautiful, and it's a very popular rose. There are meanings behind the colors of roses. Um, and these are, well, I guess it's historical too. Red means love. Red rose, if someone gives you a red rose, boy, that means they really love you. Yellow represents friendship. And on the right, I have a photo of yellow roses from my own garden. This is a photo of Golden Celebration roses, which is a David Austin rose. And it's one of my favorites. And the smell is just heavenly. White represents purity, innocence, and new beginnings. Pink represents innocence and gentleness. Lavender represents love and enchantment, and purple, intense passion. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about roses and artwork, but I wanted to share with you a few pieces of my own artwork as I'm an artist. The one on the left is a charcoal I did on color fix pastel paper with actually a vine charcoal. And I didn't set out to paint a rose that day. I was listening to some classical music, and I kind of got in a trance, and that's what happened. And I was pleased with it. And I kept it. The one on the top was from a photo I took of roses that I got from my garden, and they were in an antique canning jar that was a small jar. I don't see a lot of quart size or pint size, whatever the small one is. And actually, I got these from Dorothy Robinson, who's in our audience today. And that one, I was playing around and I was doing some side strokes with chalk pastels, and I liked how it came out. The one on the bottom was a little oil that I did. I was going to be teaching an art class in oils last year. And we did 4 different paintings in oils. And this is one of them. You'll see another one later on. So that was a little tiny little vase of some roses. And the one on the right is a watercolor I did based upon a rose I saw on a poster in Italy. So roses have inspired me in my own artwork. And let's see. One of the most famous artists who painted roses, is Pierre-Joseph Redouté. He was a painter and a botanist. He lived from 1759 to 1840. I believe he was Belgian, but he lived most of his adult life, I believe, in France. He was known as the Raphael of flowers. His patrons included both of Napoleon's wives, Empress Josephine, who I mentioned earlier, and his second wife, Marie-Louise, who was Duchess of Parma. And I didn't know much about his second wife, and so I Googled her, and then I got off on this tangent. And if y'all want some interesting history, you should Google both of those women and look at the history of it. He actually divorced Josephine because she couldn't give him a child. She couldn't get pregnant, and so he still loved her very much, and so he had her maintain her title and the property. And with Marie-Louise, she was able to give him a son, but he gave her the title Duchess of Parma. But I couldn't find any references that she was particularly interested in roses, but she must have had some because she was one of Redouté's patrons. And then much earlier, Marie Antoinette. And if you're not familiar with his name, you're probably familiar with his artwork. Here are some of his paintings, and they're still printed today, and they're very, very popular. I wanted to mention roses in art aren't just delegated to paintings on the walls. We probably have it in our daily lives and we don't even realize it. These are some photos I took of things I had. The photo on the top is of a little dish that I bought at I believe, a antique shop many, many years ago. And on the right, these are salt and pepper shakers that Granny Maggie had. I don't think they're particularly old, but I thought they were really sweet and they meant something to her, so I kept them. I want to mention that my sister got Granny Maggie's Good China, which have roses on it, and she's given that to her daughter Brooke. The bottom left photo, the plate on the left, was in a box of dishes at an auction one summer many years ago that I bought because I loved the dishes in there, and that was one of them. So you've got blue roses in there. And then the one on the right is a very famous rose pattern. Some of you may have seen it. It's called, I think, Old Garden Roses, Old Country Roses, something like that. And I have that plate. It was given to me as a wedding gift, and I absolutely love it. And then on the right, I've got these two bone china mugs. And the one on the right, you see the little yellow cream colored rose there. That's actually one of Redouté's paintings there. And the one on the left, I'm not sure who the artist was, but I love it. So I just wanted to mention you all probably have something like that at your place. Now, here's a painting that Uncle Vernie did of yellow roses. And when I was growing up, he had it hanging in their house. And I inherited it many years ago, and I'm so glad I did. And then the one on the right is it's a little tiny, it's probably 4x4, a little canvas panel. And it was the one I mentioned earlier. It was part of the class that I taught on learning to paint in oils that we did last year here at the Tipton County Museum. I wanted to mention Claude Monet at Giverny. He was a very famous artist. He was known as the father of Impressionism. He lived at Giverny from 1883 until his death in 1926. And if you're not familiar with him, he created beautiful gardens for his paintings at his property there. And one thing I kind of figured out on my own that I didn't really read anywhere else, but many years ago, about 20 some years ago, I figured out that the first hybrid tea was introduced somewhere around the same time the Impressionists were taking off. And I thought, I wonder if they're related. And I can't really find anything on that, or I couldn't, but I believe those two are related. And the first hybrid tea rose was introduced in 1867 in France called La France. And when I was researching Monet's gardens at Giverny, sure enough, he had several hybrid teas in his gardens there. The hybrid tea, and again, I'm not a master gardener, I'm not a scientist or a rose breeder, but it was a major breakthrough because prior to that time, it was very difficult to get roses to be repeat bloomers. But with the hybrid tea rose, they repeat bloom throughout the growing season. And here's a photo that I found of Monet in his gardens, probably close to early 1900s, based upon his dress there. And you can see to the left of him, you've got some rose trees growing there. And I'm not sure if that's low growing shrub roses behind him. I'm not really sure. I've never been to his place. I'm hoping once the universe opens up again, my husband and I have talked about getting to Europe, and that's one of the places definitely on my list of places to go. And I wanted to share some of his artwork with you. The one on the left was actually before he went to Giverny, but he had gardens even before Giverny. And this one is very famous, The Artist Family in the Garden from 1875. And it looks like those flowers could be roses. It's beautiful. And then one on the right is called The Artist's Garden at Giverny from 1900. And you can see the house in the background. And if you've ever seen photos or if you've ever been there, in front of the house, it's called the Grand Allée, and it's a series of arches with climbing vines and climbing roses. So I think the world is very lucky to have had Monet and have his artwork. Roses have also influenced music. We have Waltz of the Flowers by Tchaikovsky, A Spotless Rose by Howells, Roses from the South by Strauss, Les Roses d'Ispahan by Fauré, and Little Rose of the Field by Schubert. And here's some sheet music from Les Roses d'Ispahan. Roses have influenced poets over the years as well. And what child hasn't heard the little jingle, April showers bring May flowers? And then there's A Red, Red Rose by Robert Burns. And I don't remember having to memorize this poem as a child, but I'm sure I've heard it and I've read it before. And here it is on the right. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but you might be familiar with it. Oh, my love's like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love's like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. Glory to Dijon by D.H. Lawrence and One Perfect Rose by Dorothy Parker are other famous poems that were influenced by roses. And here's some common rose classifications that you might be familiar with today. I'm not going to go into them specifically, but there's climbing roses, English roses or David Austin roses are their own classification, Floribunda roses, grandiflora, ground cover, hybrid tea, miniature, polyantha, and shrub. And on the right is a photo of what I would love to do with my own property. And I have 22 acres. And what I wanted to mention about Claude Monet was he had 6 gardeners. And he was able to afford that because he sold a lot of paintings when he was older. I don't have that kind of wealth, and I'm sure my husband's quite relieved. But that, to me, that picture there is just magic, pure magic, and I just love it. I wanted to mention a little bit more about La France, which was the first hybrid tea rose. It was introduced in 1867. It was considered the birth of the modern rose. It was our first hybrid tea rose. The parentage is debated. It is repeat blooming. It's very fragrant. It's not particularly disease resistant, and you can buy it today. It's a little more difficult if you are in the United States because it was bred over there and it's not popular in the United States. And whenever there's a rose that's in another continent that comes to the United States, it's a big process to get it quarantined, things like that. So it's a little difficult to find if you are in the United States, but it's not impossible. Now, the David Austin English roses, I absolutely love these roses. His goal was to combine old roses with hybrid teas. And what he wanted was a an old, and you can see the shape of those roses. He liked them to have a lot of petals, a lot of round shape to them. And the first rose that he bred was Constance Spry in 1961. He was fairly young. And that one, I believe, was a single bloomer, but he kept at it. And I believe his father was a nurseryman, and so that's how he learned all of those things. But his big breakthrough came in 1983 with Graham Thomas. And I'm not sure if that's Graham Thomas that he's standing in front of. I've never grown it. I know that it is a yellow rose, and it is won numerous awards. It's a very famous rose of his. And again, his goal for doing this was he wanted to combine beautiful fragrance, repeat blooms, and old rose shape. And one of the things I wanted to mention about his roses is he opened up shop in Texas. And so you can buy his roses. A lot of nurseries carry them here in the United States. You can get his catalog, and they're shipped from Texas. And when he bred his roses, and by the way, he passed away in 2018, but when he bred his roses, he bred them in England. England doesn't get a lot of sunshine like we do here, at least in our area in Zone 7. And so if you grow his roses in our area, they tend to climb because they get so much more sun here than they did there. And so you might hear people saying, oh yeah, I grow his roses, but I have to constantly prune them. Well, that's why, because they were bred in an area with less sunshine. And the other thing I want to mention is with high humidity, you get more rose scent. And I used to live in Virginia, which is a similar climate to where I'm living in Tennessee. And I grew his roses there, and they were very, very fragrant. And then I lived for a number of years in Phoenix, Arizona, which was in a dry desert climate, and the fragrance was not as strong. And here in Tennessee, the fragrance is very strong again. So it kind of depends on where you are as to how strong the fragrance is. Now, the knockout rose, some people love it. Some people who are true rose lovers and believers don't care for it much at all. I happen to love it. It is a cross between Razzle Dazzle and Carefree Beauty. It was introduced in 1989, and it was kind of a breakthrough because you don't need to prune this. And my husband, for years, this is a photo of my head at my place outside. That's my art studio there with all those windows. And my husband could take the pruning, the electric pruning shears or whatever it's called, and just mow it down at the end of the season. And they came back for years like that. They do have a lot of prickles. The knockout is immune to black spot mildew, which I found to be true. And it was an All-American Rose Selection winner in the United States in the year 2000. And when you go to any of the big box stores, you can find this rose. And I absolutely love it. Unfortunately, we have rose rosette disease here. It came a couple years ago. And so I've gotten rid of all of my roses, including this one. So my husband just took it down about a month or so ago. So I'm going to miss that. And Cheryl Rose, who works here, is going to help me find something to plant in its place that will, work there for me. So I love this rose because it gives me prolific blooms. This is knockout roses. This is actually a wine jug that I found at the thrift store, and I created a still life painting of it. And that was done during COVID. And if anyone on here is an artist and wants to go online and see the little video, it's on our website under our on Tipton County Museum, the Online Academy. And I've got like a 2 or 3 minute video of this, but it was a Matisse inspired painting. Matisse was a contemporary of the Impressionists, and he was called a fauve because he was a wild beast. He was very bold in his colors, and the portraits he did back then, the people's faces would be purple and green and blue, and a lot of the portraits really looked like the people. And so it created quite a stir. So I painted this um, painting, and it was in acrylics, and it was inspired by him. But anyways, I love the knockouts. Some of y'all may not, and that's fine. I'm just sorry that the Rose Rosette, I heard lots of people say, well, it's just in the knockout roses. Well, that wasn't the case for me. So we got rid of them. Maybe someday they'll return. I don't know. There are a lot of different uses of roses. Perfumes, cosmetics, potpourri, medicines, and then you can have them in your gardens just for pleasure. Perfumes and cosmetics were created from roses in ancient civilizations. And here are some perfume bottles that were found, I believe, in Greece. And they're just beautiful. Those, to me, are works of art in themselves. The word perfume is derived from the word perfumare, which means to smoke through. And I studied Italian for a couple of years. And that, to me, looks like an Italian word, because if you put an ARE at the ending, that means it's a verb, like cantare means to sing, volare means to fly. But anyways, it could be Latin. One thing I found interesting was in May of 2018, there was an ancient perfume, Rhodo. It was recreated for the Greek National Archaeological Museum's anniversary show, Countless Aspects of Beauty. And so they took an ancient formula and they recreated a rose perfume, which I thought was really interesting. And then rose water was used by Cleopatra to soften her skin and to make her more beautiful, I'm sure, for Mark Antony. Now, potpourri, a lot of us have that in our house today. It's derived from the French word meaning rotten pot. During the Middle Ages in Europe, cloth bags were filled with dried flowers. They were filled with dried flowers and herbs, and they were placed around the house and in drawers. Early recipes included layering dried herbs with coarse sea salt, and potpourri was also scattered on floors to help mask odors. And we know during the Middle Ages, they didn't have the hygiene practices that we have today. So they needed all the help they could get. Roses have also been used in medicines. In the 1st century CE, Pliny the Elder recorded 32 different medicinal uses of the rose. And in medieval times, roses were grown more for medicine and food than for beauty, mostly in the monasteries. Rose oil has been used for many, many years in aromatherapy. And in the 1930s, it was discovered that rose hips contained a high amount of vitamin C. And here's some rose hips here. They're beautiful, and I've read many, many places that if you have roses that have rose hips at the end of the season, don't prune them. Leave them be, because they're a great source of food for the birds. Roses can also be used as pleasure gardens. Roses are fairly affordable. You can buy a rose plant from anywhere from, you can get them for $1 for those bare root things you buy at the dollar store. But you can find them for, in the pots at the local nurseries, the big, what do they call those? The box stores. You can wait till they go on sale. You can find them for 20, 25, $30. They add visual interest and beauty to your property. They offer health benefits by spending time in nature. Anytime you can spend time in nature, and you all are gardeners, you know that, it's good for the soul. It's also good exercise, bending over, pruning them, caring for them. And some roses do take a lot of care. And they may increase your property value. Um, and here's one of my rose beds. It's gone now. But here I've got some David Austin English roses in there. And I also have a Gruss and Aiken, which is an antique rose in there too. But I thought that made a real pretty bed. One of the most famous rose gardens today is Parc de Bagatelle, and it's in France, just outside of Paris. And I used to live in Paris, France. In 1970, I was in 6th grade. My father worked for the State Department, and he used to take me there on weekends, just my father and I, and it was very magical for me. The chateau was built in 1775, and back in 1970, you couldn't go inside of it because they were renovating it. They were, they didn't have the money that they have today for restoration, things like that. So, but today I understand it's fully restored. The gardens contain more than 9,000 rose plants. And it was the first time I realized roses could be grown as trees. And I don't know that there's any tree roses in there, um, but they are on the grounds and they were in the photos that I found. But I wanted this photo here because of the vastness of it. I wanted you to see the palace, the chateau, and it was just large. I don't know how many acres it is, but we used to love to go there and just walk through the gardens. And they have a little cafe there. They had it back then, they have it today. Maybe some of y'all have been there. If not, you should put it on your list of places to go see. Here are 3 of my favorites. The one on the left is called Jean Desprez. It is an antique noisette from 1826, and actually it's the only rose that we have living on the property today. It was not affected by the rose rosette, and it gets a little black spot, but not much. It's not particularly a beautiful flower. You can see on the left, it kind of loses its petals. This rose, though, is one of the most fragrant roses that I've ever smelled. And I've done absolutely nothing to this rose, and it's still thriving. And noisettes are a classification of climbing roses that are antique, and they can grow as much as 20 feet tall. And it's not been an unruly rose. It's not particularly prickly. I mean, it has prickles, but it's in a place that gets a lot of sun, faces northwest. And like I said, I've done nothing to it, and it has just thrived there. And I just love it. The one in the middle, I've mentioned before, Golden Celebration, and David Austin English Rose. And then Paul Néron, I believe that one was from 1992. And this again is one of the photos from my own garden. It does get some black spot on it, and you have to stay on top of it. You have to prune it a lot. And those flowers, sometimes, especially after the rain, they get very heavy and they tend to fall over. So if you like a cut rose, a beautiful cut rose, what you want to do is cut that when the blooms are just starting to bud out. And so like that rose there, if you were to cut it at that point and put it in a vase, it wouldn't last very long. But that other photo I had, those were earlier. They were tightened. They hadn't opened yet, and those last a lot longer as a cut flower. And then again, Paul Néron, which was a hybrid perpetual from 1869. I wanted to mention the sources of my roses. Ones, and I don't recommend one over the other. I'm just telling you where I've bought my roses over the years, other than local nurseries. Jean Desprez was one that I wanted. I had researched that one, and I knew I wanted that particular rose, and I couldn't find it anywhere. I believe that Heirloom Roses carried it, but they were out of stock. So I found it at Wayside Gardens, which is a catalog, and they also sell I think trees and other things in addition to roses. So I found it there. Golden Celebration, I believe I bought at Heirloom Roses. And that's a catalog out of, I think, Oregon, maybe. I've also bought many roses from Jackson Perkins. And Paul Néron, I really don't remember where I got that one. And another place catalog that I've purchased roses from is the Antique Rose Emporium out of Texas. And I've been pleased with all of my catalog purchases. But anyways, those are my favorites. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And if anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself. I'm going to put stop share here. And if you have any questions, you can, let's see, chat. I don't see any chats. Thank you for joining me today. And I did record this, so it will be up probably in the next week or two. What I do is I give it to Sherry here. She's our graphics guru. And I'm not going anywhere. I'll see you around. And again, thanks for joining me. And be looking for our February gardening series on Zoom. And again, if anyone would like to present, please reach out to us.
This is I really enjoyed your presentation, Miss Foster.
Oh, Booker, thank you. I'm so tickled that you're
great
here.
job. I know Tipton kind of going to miss you at the museum. That's some sad news to see you go. But thanks for being on the TV program with me a lot of time. I appreciate that. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you. And I really enjoyed being on your TV program, and maybe I'll be on it again someday. Who knows?
Yeah, we're not doing any taping right now, but when we start there, I'll keep it in mind and make sure.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No chats? Well, enjoy growing roses. And I'm going to sign off now if there's nothing else. And y'all go enjoy your weekend and try and stay warm.